Okay, so this is a lot to chew for one presentation. I would say that I gave Stanley Whitney a bit of a shorter take because there's so much complexity to saw LeWitt that I focus a lot of time on him. But these two artists share a love for color, and there's a musicality in their work. Their processes could not be more different. Saw LeWitt is an orchestrator. He literally, scores his pieces. He writes out instructions on how they're painted, and other artists would come in and paint them. He would have specific crews of people who would come in and do the work. Now, he did work on them also, but he basically wrote his paintings. Now, Stanley Whitney is if Saw LeWitt is an orchestrator and a composer, Stanley Whitney is a jazz soloist. He's like Thelonious Monk. He's Miles Davis on canvas. So that being said, let's dive in. Okay. So this is a Saw LeWitt piece, and both of them share, both Stanley and Saul share a basic grid notion that they're working off of. It expands exponentially, but it's a basic underlying grid pattern that they start off with and work out from there. A square divided horizontally and vertically into 4 equal parts, each with a different direction of alternating parallel bands of lines. Now, we're dealing with a digital image here, so you can't really see the subtlety of what's going on in this print. The print was created, the printmaker that created it for Saw LeWitt, following his instructions, is a Japanese printmaker, and I can't remember his name now. I didn't write it down, but basically, the woodcut that this is made from is hand colored. Basically, what he did was he used a brush to paint on the ink, and then print off of that. So there's a real evidence of the presence of a mark making process. It's a handmade print, and you can tell that it is that. And that's very important in many ways to Saw LeWitt's work. It's a humanizing element that's in the work. Okay, let's move on. Okay. So Saw LeWitt is known as a conceptual artist. And what exactly does that mean? Well, okay. In conceptual art, the idea or concept is the most important aspect of the work. When an artist uses a conceptual form of art, it means that all the planning and decisions are made beforehand, and the execution is a perfunctory affair. Now, I would have bones to pick with that one. I don't think that's really true of his work throughout, but this was written in 1967. So, basically his work evolved over time, and there's a lot of other things that went on there. Now, looking at these two pieces that are on the screen, these are actually large scale pieces. This is 11 feet tall by 22 feet wide. And you see again these primary colors, the the alternating directions of strokes, that same concept played out in a different form, but very simple to begin with. Oh, okay. And there's instructions down here at the bottom that talk about what went on here. Two drawing, two walls are each divided horizontally and vertically into 4 equal parts. First wall, 12 inches. This is how it goes. Okay. We'll talk more about his instructions. They can get pretty hysterical at times. Actually, he had quite a sense of humor, and for somebody as shall I say, ambitious in his thinking. His ego is very, how shall I say? He's a participant. I'll put it that way. Okay. So, straight and not straight. This is an etching, and there's a straight line grid in it, and then there's these wavy lines that are in between each of those pieces. And if you start to really look at the thing, the interaction between the straight line grid and these wavy lines, your eye plays back and forth between searching for the straight lines and the wavy lines, and then your eye bounces around the surface at all these interesting shapes that are happening in the kind of interaction of the wavy lines. You can get lost in this piece for a very long time. Just your eye just starts to bounce around the thing. So it's quite remarkable how a really simple idea can be played out with endless variations. This very complex grid, and but it's a very, very simple, straightforward idea. But look at the variations on it. There's 3 other etchings, but there's a set of, I think, 16 in this series, or maybe it's 12 in the series. Okay. All right. Now, this is a wall drawing. It's 11 by 11 feet. It's at Mass MoCA. I will mention Mass MoCA a number of times throughout this thing. He has a show on now of his prints at the museum in basically in New Bedford. New Britain, excuse me. The New Britain Museum of American Art, and it's a wonderful show of the prints. But at Mass MoCA, there is a building that's devoted to his work, and it's going to be on there until 2030. So it's definitely at some point worth a trip up to the Berkshires to go see that section of the museum, if not the rest of the museum, which is a tremendous experience. So this again is squares bordered and divided horizontally and vertically into 4 equal squares, each with bands in one of 4 directions. Okay. You can see the texture and the quality of the paint that's laid on there. There's a system to all these things. I mean, basically, he was very much involved in making these kind of formulas and rules to follow when you're creating the pieces, so that the people who actually execute the piece have instructions on how many layers of color go on. So what's going on here is he breaks it down into a diluted ink, basically in red, yellow, and blue, and gray. Okay, and a layer of yellow and blue make a green. A layer of blue and yellow make a green, but they make different greens. So, you know, according to how many layers of blue you put on or how many layers of yellow you put on, it's going to alter the color. So he does that with all of these. You know, the orange is a combination of yellow and red. You know, how many layers of red you put on will create the density of the red. And then there's gray, and you add the gray to it, it alters the color again. So this was all in 1980. He moved out of New York City because it was getting too crazy for him. He moved to Italy and lived in Italy for about 10 years, married there, and was very influenced by the murals of Italy, and they're very, you know, basically that the quality of paint going directly onto a wall was something that really interested him. So these pieces are ragged on. Okay, you're using diluted inks, and they rag on the color. They mask off the lines and rag on the color, and then let that dry, and then do another layer over the top of that. So there's this texture and this quality that's in the paint that's really lovely. Okay, we're going to move on. Got a lot of territory to cover. So this is a shot inside Mass MoCA, just to give you an idea of the scale of things. You know, this is a 33,000 square foot building that he has totally occupied. When they asked him if he wanted to do a show, he said he went up and looked at the museum when it was in formulation, and looked at all the buildings, and the curator director asked him which floor he would like, and he said, well, I like that building. And he said, the whole building? And he said, yeah, the whole building. So so that's what's there. And here is a wall painting that is at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Hartford. And this is on permanent display also, which is only about 10 minutes from the New Britain Museum. So if you go up to see the print show, you could actually conceivably go into Hartford and see this mural at the Wadsworth, which is another pretty wonderful museum. Okay, so we're going to move on. And I'm going to give you some background. Basically, LeWitt went to college. He actually went to Syracuse University and studied printmaking there. And these are lithographs that he did, lithographs and woodcuts, aquatints that he did while he was there. And the process of printmaking was something that he was really interested in. Basically, if you think about it, it's sort of a model for this conceptual art that he eventually grew into. You really have to think in process and systems and plan when you're doing printmaking. You need to, think clearly about the technical aspects of it. How long is the plate going to be in the acid bath? What layer of color are you putting on when you're doing a print? So the way of thinking in all of this was something which really he enjoyed. He really liked that. So it's something that affected him throughout his career. And on all the way on the left is a painting that he did in 1960, very juicy, kind of semi-abstract. You know, there's a lot going on. He was checking it all out at that point and just trying to find himself. So he moved into a studio in New York, and somebody left a book behind by Muybridge. These you probably have seen Muybridge stop motion photographs. He set up a whole set of cameras and tried to understand motion. So this was before, you know, it was 1887 when these were taken. This really, you know, LeWitt looked long and hard at this and thought about this, the serial business, the idea of a series, a repeat and variation. That it had a really profound effect on him. And these two pieces, these two relief sculpture pieces that you see here, were pieces that he did in 1961. You know, it's around the time of pop art. The integration of word and image was something that was really, you know, going around. You notice the sensuality, the idea that he put on. You can see that these are thickly painted. The areas that have the paint on them are pretty thickly painted. So he had a real interest in the materiality of this stuff. That's why I questioned his perfunctory business that he said earlier in that treatise on conceptual art. Anyway, let's move on. Okay. Oh, all right. So this is what he called one of the structures. Okay, and basically you can see that this is a precursor of a lot of the things that he was doing with the grid later on. These boxes, you know, the directionality of the line, you know, how he laid them out, and all that is definitely repeated in his etchings and throughout his career. But inside these boxes were these images that you see on the left, which is really interesting, kind of surrealist, Dadaist, kind of dreamlike aspect. And I threw in Homage to Square by Joseph Albers because the color stuff, the contextual color of Albers, I think, had a really profound effect on LeWitt and his color sensibility throughout his career. And then down in the lower left, I threw in an assemblage piece by Jasper Johns, which is very familiar, I'm sure, to many of you. So this was stuff this was in 1955 that Johns did that piece. So there's a whole awareness that LeWitt was bringing to this piece that was something that was in the air at the time, but very interesting. I was kind of surprised when I found this piece. Okay, and you know, there was what was called minimalist conceptual art A number of different people. Dan Flavin was friends with Saul LeWitt, and they talked about a lot of ideas about how a piece could occupy space and what it did in that space, and making very simple, clear statements with the work. So again, you see these etchings, and one of them is for Eva. Okay, so Eva Hess was a very close friend of Saul LeWitt. They had a lot of interaction. They talked a lot. Eva Hess is another what was called a conceptual artist, though I think she was a lot more performative too. And there is a kind of again a humanizing aspect. There's a kind of fleshiness to this fiberglass polyester resin that Eva Hess was using, and she did a lot of things that were kind of made out of this kind of industrial material, but kind of like very fleshy, very humanized in some way. It also, dealing with all that resin stuff, she died young, so basically she got cancer from dealing with all the, I think it was from dealing with all the toxic stuff that she was using, but I don't know that one for sure. But the interaction between them was very important to LeWitt. I mean, LeWitt had these very definite, rigid ideas, and she was very much into using the increment but softening it by the approach to it and the ideas in them. Okay, we're going to keep moving here. All right. So an integral part of LeWitt's work are these structures. He called his sculpture structures rather than calling it sculpture, because he felt more of an affinity to architecture than to what was considered to be sculpture at the time. I'm gonna keep moving because we got a lot to cover. The geometric business, they flip around in space. These pieces are really interesting. There's a few of them up at Mass MoCA. Definitely an experience to stand in front of, but you can see how they kind of flip around in space. They're what's in front, what's in back, which direction do they actually go in? So it's really optical. A lot of the stuff has, very optical illusion, kind of resonance in it. All right, and now we're going to get to very funny. This guy had a real sense of humor. The location of 100 random specific points. The locations are determined by the drafters. August 1977, black pencil and black crayon. So if you read a couple of these things, so I'm just going to read one. 59 point is located halfway between the 8th point and a point halfway between a point halfway between a point halfway between the midpoint of the bottom side and the lower right-hand corner and the lower right corner and midway of the right side. Okay. So, like I said, he had quite a sense of humor about himself. But there were a lot of people that were into these very highfalutin treaties that went with this conceptual stuff. It's pretty funny. All right. So here is one of his wall pieces. 24 lines from the center, 12 lines from the midpoint of each of the sides, 12 lines from each corner. 1976, from wall drawing. Wax crayon, graphite pencil, paint on wall, dimensions variable according to where it's installed. So this piece was installed at the Whitney when he did a retrospective there in 2000. I put up this Piero della Francesca to give you some idea of the parallels and the bouncing back and forth between the old masters and the ideas that LeWitt was playing with. Because this business of a center of focus is something which is inside the old masters. When you look at Piero della Francesca, he was a great mathematician, and so the use of this kind of structural focus is something that he was very involved in and very consciously put into his compositions. And Sol LeWitt really saw that and resonated with that whole idea. He did a lot of these wall pieces. LeWitt, basically, did this from there was a wall that he had to do in the early 70s, I believe it was, in Italy, and they gave him a lousy wall in this gallery, and so he just had to make it up when he got there. And what he ended up doing was there were all these light switches and grills and lights and signs and things like that on the wall. So what he did was take a chalk line and draw it from each thing to the other things on the wall. And that was the creation of his piece. Pretty interesting. Okay. And then we're going to go back to this basic grid. And it basically is the simple forms and patterns, and then taking this and layering it like this. Okay, if you look at these 5 silk screens, basically what he did was turn the paper when it was in the process of being printed, so it was the same lines that were moved in different directions and blocked off in different ways. He set up all these really kind of complex patterns of application for the same image. Let's see. Okay. And here we have, this is at Mass MoCA. Here you have gray, yellow, red, blue. Then you have yellow, probably with gray underneath it, and then red with gray under it, and then blue with gray under it. And then you have a orange, which is kind of like it would be a yellow with a red ragged over the top of that. So you end up with this kind of orange. And then the green was created by putting a yellow down and a blue over the top of that, or a blue down and a yellow over the top of that, and so forth. So you can see how, and you can also see the texture in these things. I love the richness of the color that comes out of this process. They're also joyful. I mean, it's really buoyant color. It's wonderful aspect. And I haven't really found too much that talked about the kind of upbeat quality of what these things are. Uh, but I really, you know, just I love his stuff. Okay. Now, after all this process stuff and the rigidity and kind of rules that he had set down for himself, he was asked to do, he was commissioned to do a poster for the Mozart uh, concert in 1998. And he decided to, you know, just wing it and do something different for him. And so he just let himself, you know, play around with wavy lines and different patterns on the thing. He loved music. He was like very much a classical music fan, loved Mozart. So it was a thing of joy for him to play with this. And he thought it was just a one-off, but he enjoyed doing it so much that he integrated this into his process after that. And basically irregular arcs, bands, and loops from 1998. It's kind of an improvisation off of the poster. And if you look below, there's this. He had a place in Italy that they went to, and basically this chapel that was built. I don't know. It wasn't an ancient chapel. It was like 1919 that it was built, so it wasn't anything special. But he was commissioned to do a piece there, and did an extension of the mark making that he came up with for the mostly Mozart business. And here is a crew painting one of the paintings. So you can see it's masked off at this point, and they're brushing on the paint in layers. And here's a completed version of something like the one that we saw before. It's not exactly the same piece, but similar composition. And you can see down below a wall that's being prepared. Okay. And you know, basically he had gallerists that he was working with, and they would ask him for the names of the pieces and things like that. And he came up with the name Loopy Doopy for this particular kind of pattern on the left. That there's a black one. On the bottom, I set in this woodcut, this 20 by 28 inch woodcut, using a similar kind of pattern. And the piece on the right, he called splotch paintings. So, you know, as serious and intellectual as his pursuits were, he definitely kept his sense of humor. And they're wonderful pieces to experience. I mean, going up to Mass MoCA is definitely worth a trip. Okay, and this is the synagogue that he attended in Chester, Connecticut. They when they moved back from Italy, they bought a house in Chester, Connecticut, which is a really nice kind of suburban area outside of, or country area outside of New Haven and all that. It's near Lyme. And this is the synagogue that they used to attend, and he created this with an architect, Stephen Lloyd. And so this is the interior of it. There's more to it. It looks just gorgeous. I've never been to it. I'd love to go. The wood and the use of the structures and stuff like that. It's a combination of his sculpture and wall painting. Excuse me, wall drawing. He always referred to these paintings as wall drawings. He did not call them paintings. Very specific in his language about these things. And then on the upper right is a wash drawing that's at the Dallas Museum of Art. Okay, we're going to move on. There's so much more to Sol LeWitt than I'm covering here. It's definitely worth a trip to the New Britain Museum right now, and at some point, if you get yourself up to Mass MoCA, it's worth the time. So we're going to move on to Stanley Whitney, and I wanted to come back to this business of the musicality and music as it relates to abstract painting. Mondrian. There's a very famous painting called Broadway Boogie Woogie. That's not what this one is. I chose this one because it has a very similar kind of grid-like structure that I felt had a relationship to Stanley's work and a relationship to Sol LeWitt's work. And then Sophie Tover-Arp, who I had done a few sessions ago, and the show just opened at the Museum of Modern Art, which I haven't seen yet, but I'm looking forward to. So the use of color and the use of the geometric form and the interaction of the shapes and all that is something which there's a correlation to music, and it's not literal note for note. It's really about harmonics. It's about chord progressions. It's about a sense of a resonance, echoing of other forms. Kind of, there's a thing about quotations in jazz where you'll hear a few riffs in a song from another pop tune, just kind of immersed in it. And so there's echoes inside these abstract paintings of other abstract paintings. So that's why I wanted to put this out there. And we're going to move on and dive into Stanley at this point. He's one of the best abstract painters around today, in my opinion. It's kind of hard to see the nuance in these digital images. Basically, these things are about paint. They're about the application of the paint, the speed with which it's put on, the slowness that it's put on with, the layering, the brushwork, how the drips come over certain sections, what's painted over what all these things are things which happen very, it takes time to really sit with them and get what's going on with them, and really get the movement and the sense of rhythm that's set up in the paintings. Tango, two birds. And one of the things that I've heard him talk about is, at times he would, steal a color from a painter. So there was a Goya that he saw that had a particular red in it, and it resonated in this painting for him. So it's Goya red. And you can see the transparencies, you can see the drips, you can see the brush marks and the directionality of the brushwork, where things meet, where things don't meet. All these things shift around in there. The warm and cool, basically there's this really hot, that second square in there on the top, that red with that darker red painted over the top of it, and the brighter red wants to pop forward, but the other one is insistently painted over it. you know. So there's a tension that's set up in these paintings that kind of it takes time to absorb and sit with. And this is part of the installation at Listen Gallery that's on right now. It's on through, I think, December 18th. I've got the dates at the end. But this gives you some idea of the scale of the pieces. And then there's, you know, there's small intimate pieces that are in the show also. These are watercolors. Okay. And these are small scale pieces. The small oils are 1 by 1 foot. And then these watercolors, I think, are like 11 by 14 or something like that. I can't remember the exact size, but one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit was the compositional devices or design restrictions, limitations he has imposed on himself that he's going to work with these, you know, these squares and rectangles and the interaction of those things and the white spaces between them and the space, the which is on top of which, what's the size of the mark next to the other mark. And what I wanted to bring in is Giorgio Morandi, who again worked with these same still life objects for over 50 years. By 1960, he was, you know, getting up there. He only lived until 1964. So you see the increments in this piece where it's really abstracted, and how do the edges meet? What's going on with this kind of organic wavy quality that's happening there? This was really a conscious thing on his part to play with these spaces and how the empty spaces interact with the painted spaces. And this is something, you know, Stanley acknowledges Morandi as somebody that he's looked at a lot, and you can see that there's a consciousness that goes into how these pieces are placed on the page and how the colors interact with each other. It may be intuitive, but it's a informed intuition. Wonderful painter. And this was a very, you know, saturated, the interaction of tone and color, you know, basically the light tone next to a darker color, this bright blue in the center square next to the red. Now, blue is a cool color. It tends to recede, but it's also tonally lighter. So there's a tension that's set up by that. You know, there's these bright reds that want to come out, and this blue which wants to recede, but it also is lighter than they are tonally. So it's popping out, and there's these two kind of yellow orange squares on the top and bottom. You know, there's a lot of things popping around in this painting, and it's something where you just kind of, you sit there with it and meditate with it. I wish we had more time to do that. Okay, inside out. So the variation in red in this piece, and you know, there's subtle stuff going on underneath the surface. There's the complementary color of the green playing against all these reds and oranges. Really interesting. ivy blue. That blue centerpiece, you know, there's these little pieces in the corner where that orange that's up at the top comes down underneath those red squares, and you can see little pieces of the orange showing through in the corners where he left it. He didn't coat them, didn't cover them up, and there's a little sliver between the red square and the blue square. That's this orange kind of peeking through. Really interesting choices and intuitions. You know, there's this at the bottom, there's this yellow that's kind of like turns green underneath the white. You know, these are all really nuanced things that a person who's been painting these paintings for 30 years starts to do as a intuitive process. Very different from LeWitt's 2 layers of blue, 1 layer of yellow, but there is a buoyance to the color in both of these painters, which I thought, you know, although they are conceptually very different in their approach, one is a painter's painter, the other one is someone who had these really tremendous ideas and played them out on a very large scale. What fun. Just brilliant. And, you know, this one just brings to mind, you know, straight improvisation from, you know, harmonic chromatic scales. This piece is going to be, I believe this piece is going to be in the Venice Biennale, which is coming up in 2022. That about does it. Brilliant painting. Fun gestures and all that, really playful. So there is a talk that there's a YouTube from the New Britain Museum on the print show that's there. Well worth watching. It's I think it's about 45 minutes long. Then there's the LeWitt wall drawings, which is available on Canopy, which actually shows the process of them painting a whole bunch of these pieces at Mass MoCA. And that's a really good one. And then the one below that is a great interview. These are also, both of these are available on Canopy, by the way. The LeWitt for Decades is an interview with the curator of the show, the retrospective that took place out at San Francisco Museum of Fine Art, Museum of Modern Art in 2000. So that's a really wonderful interview with him, which, you know, Saul did not like to be photographed. He did not like to be, you know, and so the fact that he actually went into this and allowed himself to be interviewed and interact that way, it was really wonderful. And then Stanley Whitney, there's a few YouTube videos of him. There's one from the School of Visual Arts, and there's one from the Studio Museum in Harlem, which is where he had a exhibit in 2015, which was a really great show. I saw that. There's also in the works a retrospective of his work that's going to work its way across the country, and I believe it is coming to New York, but I'm not sure where it's coming to, but I'll let you know if I hear about that. The next thing that we're going to do is on the 17th, and that is from a show of Weather Vanes, which is at the Museum of Folk Art in New York. And I may throw some other things in there in the bargain. But if you want to get to go see the Stanley Whitney show, it's on till the 18th of December, and the Strict Beauty show is on at New Britain until the 9th of January, and the wall paintings at NASMOCA are up there through 2030, so you have time to get up there. Okay.
Thank you. I needed to know that.
Yep.
Thank you. Just some compliments, but no questions. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat function.
Yeah.
And Larry will be able to answer the questions, but I see there's none.
Okay.
So I guess we're good to go. I think you should all go to MassMocha and get yourself a nice holiday gift. Certainly they have nice reproductions. I absolutely loved LeWitt stuff. So there you go.
Fabulous.
Oh, that was stunning. So thank you all for coming to today's program. Oh, there is just more thank yous. So please go to our website, chappaqua.library.org, to see all the programs that are offered. They're not only the adult programs, but they're teen and children's programs. So hope to see you there. If I don't see you, if you missed the 17th, I hope you all have a good holiday season. And I hope for those who have celebrated Hanukkah have had a good holiday season and are still having it for a while. So thank you all again, and a belated happy Thanksgiving. And anything else? I think I'm done. Okay, Larry.
Okay.